Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Shuster. All of us, of course, are deeply aware, painfully aware that we seem to be living in two Americas, the America of the informed and those who are uninformed. And nowhere is the example more deep and frustrating than perhaps in COVID-19. There are some people who just won't take the vaccine, are misinformed by Fox News and all the rest. And as a result, the numbers are going back up. Well, there's an effort to try to change this and to try to help people become more informed and draw attention to this deeply disturbing divide in America. Kristen Urquiza is the co-founder and executive director of Marked by COVID. It is a nonprofit, and she joins us now from San Francisco. Kristen, this is deeply personal to you. Explain why.
My dad passed away from COVID-19, and that happened about a year ago on June 30th. But part of the reason why he got sick in the first place was that he believed what was coming out of the president's mouth and the governor of Arizona's mouth and what was being broadcasted on Fox News, that it was safe to resume normal activities. And so disinformation played a huge role in my dad's passing.
Was he aware at the end that he had been misled?
He told me he felt betrayed. It was one of the last things that we talked about before he was intubated. And it broke my heart to know that the people that he trusted misled him, and that in the end, it cost him his life.
Kristen, how old was he?
My dad was 65, and he hadn't had the chance to retire yet. He was getting ready for that. He was in the prime of his life and did not consider himself old by any stretch of the imagination. He was the life of the party and a wonderful guy who did not deserve what happened to him.
We are so sorry about what happened to your dad. How did you essentially come to terms with the grief and be able to sort of turn yourself towards the greater good of helping people based on this horrific experience that you've had in your family?
It's a great question. I co-founded Marked by COVID because my dad, while his story was tragic, I could tell it wasn't unique. This was happening to people all across the country. And I needed to be able to, raise my voice in order to help other people, to slow the spread, and also to really, point out the leadership failure, the policy failure, and the disinformation failure that was fueling the pandemic. And that's what I've been doing for the last year.
For the last couple of weeks, we've seen a growing number of Fox News personalities who seem to cast doubt on the vaccine and the coronavirus now come around and say, well, yeah, we believe in science, said Sean Hannity, and others who say, yeah, go ahead and take the vaccine, said Steve Doocy. What do you make of the sort of the way they've come around, and is it too late?
I mean, I think that this is a strategic move on their behalf. I'm sure that their sponsors, investors are breathing down their necks because it's become clearer and clearer, just the huge role that media outlets like Fox plays in fueling disinformation. And this isn't unique to the coronavirus. This has been around for a really long time. And I think the virus, like exposing the huge health inequities that exist in our system, are also exposing the deepness of disinformation and the complicit actors like Fox and Friends.
Is there a correlation between level of education and misinformation, or people being misinformed? In other words, I mean, it seems like there's an argument now that the divide in the United States is really between, the coasts and sort of the South and the heartland. But it feels like there may be something else going on.
Well, one thing I do know for sure is that the majority of people, upwards of 80% who are unvaccinated, make less than $60,000 a year. So this is not just a coastal thing. It's a thing about poverty versus folks with higher incomes. And in the case of my dad, I mean, he was a really smart individual. But part of his loyalty to Fox and the Trump administration has to deal with the fact that was, he was a lover of the Republican Party. He was a lifelong Republican, and those news stations to him seemed to be sort of the microphone of the party, which is exactly what we're seeing.
Given that frustration that so many people have, a lack of trust in institutions, which we hear about particularly in lower income and people who've lost their jobs because of technology or because of change, and they feel like, well, the government hasn't done anything to protect them, and therefore they can't trust politicians, they can't trust government institutions, they can't trust systems to sort of help them. And so I suppose, when somebody like a Donald Trump comes along and says, oh yeah, you shouldn't trust them, and here's why, it's almost sort of irresistible. Given that sort of frame of reference that they have, how do you get them to go from that deep mistrust that they have of all things institutional, and get them to trust the science and trust the National Institutes of Health and the CDC?
Well, the thing is that this type of work takes years because this is a type of programming that's been going on. And when it comes to the coronavirus response, we don't have years, we have minutes. This is a race against time, and solely focusing on disinformation is not going to get us the vaccination rates that we need. So right now, what we are focused on doing is helping to make sure that we lower barriers to access to people who want to get vaccinated, and do what we can to start that long-term education to help bring people back from a totally different place. And that starts with not shaming people. These folks in many instances are victims of disinformation, and we cannot blame them fully for the way that they see the world, because they really are existing in an alternative universe.
We've seen honest obituaries on the rise over the last year, and I believe there was one also with your dad. What sort of role do honest obituaries play in sort of grabbing people's attention and educating people?
An obituary is a really powerful tool that a family has, and really saying the last word for their family. When my dad passed, we wrote an honest obituary in which we squarely put the cause of his death not only on COVID-19, but on the politicians who continue to undermine public health outcomes for people of color. It was essential in helping to get my story out there and connect me with other people who feel the same way. And so I think that there's two roles that these obituaries play. One, they allow you to have the last word, to be able to really claim the cause of death and real terminology, but they also help connect people who feel similar to you. And that's one of the things that was incredibly overwhelming at first, was just seeing how, although I felt alone in my father's death, I actually was feeling the way that so many other people out there were feeling about these preventable deaths because of the way that we originally handled the pandemic.
Who's your target audience? And I ask this because, I just saw an interview with somebody who said, look, even though my senator has said, yes, go ahead and get the vaccine, I'm still not going to get it. And so it seems like there's some people who just, no matter what you say, no matter what a senator says, a politician says, President Trump says, they're just not going to do it. Are there persuadables, though? Are there people who are perhaps more reluctant or hesitant that you think are the people who, given the short amount of time that we have, can be persuaded by this campaign?
Absolutely, David. Our target audience right now happens to be people who want to get vaccinated but have barriers to access. So for example, the Latino community, which is a community that I'm a part of, we have the lowest vaccination rate still and the lowest vaccine hesitancy rate. Basically, that means that our people want to get vaccinated but are having difficulties in accessing a vaccine. And sometimes this is as simple as being able to have access to medical information in a language that they speak, or something as simple as being able to have guaranteed paid time off to be able to get the vaccine.
And our government institutions, local governments, state governments, what are some of the concrete steps they could take in order to try to reach out, say, to the Latino community?
One of the best ways in order to reach out to the Latino community is to work with leaders in the community and to bring the vaccines directly to places of business as well as places of worship. Being able to partner with grocery stores, with other sort of businesses that essential workers work at, has been a tried and true tested method that has helped increase vaccination rates in historically Hispanic communities.
Do you have a sense about, well, first of all, are you very optimistic that this campaign will work? And how do you define success?
I am cautiously optimistic is the way I typically describe most of the things that I do. But success is twofold. It's one, whenever we are able to control the virus so that it is not replicating in ways that it is. And also, it's whenever people who have been severely harmed by the pandemic, people who have lost loved ones, the 110,000 children who lost a caretaker, folks like that, whenever they have what they need so that they're not further left behind as we eventually recover from this pandemic.
Kristen, what you're doing is so powerful and so inspiring. And I hope, even if you just save, one life, to me, you've done it. And we really appreciate your efforts. And again, our deepest condolences on the loss of your father. And again, we're just so grateful for how you've been able to turn this into help the greater good and help us so many people who lack access to COVID-19 vaccines and other information. Kristen Urquiza, she's the co-founder, executive director of Marked by COVID. Kristen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You've got it. And that is this edition of The Conversation. On behalf of Asher Cofield and the rest of the gang at TYT and The Conversation, I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.